Picture this. Eastern Front, winter of 1945. A Tiger I heavy tank sits immobilized in frozen mud, its 56 tons of steel transformed from fearsome predator to stationary target. Soviet artillery has found its range. The crew abandons the vehicle. Within hours, demolition charges reduce Nazi Germany's most feared tank to scrap metal. Total loss. Now picture something else. Same front, same conditions. An 8-wheeled armoured car, sleek and angular, races across the frozen steppe at 90 km per hour. Soviet gunners track it. Fire. Miss. The vehicle disappears into the tree line, its crew intact, its mission accomplished. It will fight again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. This is the Sd.Kfz 234/2 Puma, and while history obsesses over Tigers and Panthers, this machine tells a different story about armoured warfare. A smarter story. The Puma survived when Tigers died. It succeeded where Panzer IVs failed, and it did so by rejecting the fundamental assumption that had driven tank development since 1916, that armour and firepower trump everything else. The Puma proved something the generals didn't want to hear. Sometimes the ability to run away is more valuable than the ability to stand and fight. Let's rewind to 1940. Germany had just conquered France in 6 weeks. Blitzkrieg had worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Panzer divisions had sliced through Allied defences like razors through paper. Speed, shock, and coordination had defeated numerically superior forces. The Wehrmacht's armoured reconnaissance units had been crucial to this success. Light armoured cars raced ahead of the main forces, identifying enemy positions, finding weak points, screening flanks. They were the eyes of the beast. But the existing reconnaissance vehicles had problems. The Sd.Kfz. 222 and 231 series were effective enough against Poland and France, but they were lightly armoured, often struggled with rough terrain, and carried insufficient firepower for the evolving battlefield. As Germany prepared for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, military planners recognized they needed something better, something that could survive the vast distances of Russia, something that could fight when necessary and flee when prudent. The requirement was demanding. The new reconnaissance vehicle needed speed, at least 80 km per hour on roads. It needed range, capable of operating hundreds of kilometers from supply lines. It needed all-terrain capability to handle Russian mud, snow, sand, and everything in between. It needed enough armour to protect against small arms and shell fragments. It needed firepower sufficient to engage enemy reconnaissance units and soft targets, and crucially, it needed to be reliable. Breaking down 200 kilometers behind enemy lines meant death. The development process began in 1940, but the Puma wouldn't see combat until 1943. Why the delay? Because what the Wehrmacht wanted was extraordinarily difficult to create. The design team, led by engineers at Büsing-Nag, faced a series of contradictory requirements. High speed meant lightweight. Lightweight meant thin armour. Thin armour meant vulnerability. But vulnerability was unacceptable. Every design choice involved compromise. The solution they arrived at was radical. 8 wheels instead of 4 or 6. This distributed the vehicle's weight more evenly, improved cross-country performance, and meant that damage to 1 or 2 wheels wouldn't immobilize the vehicle. All 8 wheels were driven, providing exceptional traction. All 8 could be steered, with the front 4 providing primary steering and the rear 4 capable of steering in the opposite direction for incredibly tight turns. This gave the Puma a turning radius that seemed to defy physics for a vehicle of its size. The suspension system was sophisticated, using independent torsion bars for each wheel. This allowed the Puma to maintain high speeds over rough terrain without shaking the crew apart or damaging components. Each wheel could move independently, keeping all 8 in contact with the ground even over obstacles that would have beached a conventional armoured car. The power plant was a Tatra 103 air-cooled diesel engine, producing 210 horsepower. Diesel meant better fuel economy than gasoline engines, crucial for long-range reconnaissance missions. Air-cooled meant no radiator to be punctured by shrapnel, no coolant to freeze in Russian winters. The engine was mounted in the rear, with the transmission capable of driving the vehicle at nearly the same speed in reverse as forward. This wasn't just a clever feature, it was a survival mechanism. A reconnaissance vehicle that spots the enemy often needs to retreat immediately. The Puma could reverse at 70 km per hour, allowing it to back away from danger without turning around, keeping its heavier frontal armour toward the threat. The armour itself was a study in pragmatic design. The hull was constructed of rolled homogeneous steel plates welded together at angles to maximise effective thickness. The front armour was 30 mm thick at sharp angles, providing protection against heavy machine gun fire and small-caliber anti-tank weapons. The sides were 8 mm, enough to stop rifle bullets and shrapnel but nothing more. This was honest armour. It didn't pretend to turn the vehicle into a tank. It acknowledged reality. This was a scout car, not a brawler. The turret was where the Puma truly distinguished itself. Unlike earlier German armoured cars with open-topped turrets, the Puma featured a fully enclosed turret with a powerful 50 mm KWK 39/1L/60 gun. This was the same weapon mounted on later variants of the Panzer III medium tank. It could fire armour-piercing rounds capable of penetrating 60 mm of armour at 500 meters. Against the sides and rear of most Allied tanks, this was lethal. Against other reconnaissance vehicles, it was devastating. The gun could elevate to +20 degrees and depress to -10 degrees, allowing engagement of targets on slopes and from hull-down positions. A coaxial 7.92 mm MG42 machine gun provided anti-personnel capability. The turret could traverse 360 degrees, allowing the Puma to engage threats from any direction without moving the hull. The commander and gunner sat in the turret with excellent visibility through vision ports and the gun sight. This was critical. Reconnaissance is about seeing without being seen, and the Puma's crew had the optics and sight lines to spot enemies at maximum range. The crew numbered 4: commander, gunner, driver, and radio operator/hull machine gunner. All were positioned with remarkable efficiency. The driver sat at the front left, with a second set of controls at the front right for the radio operator, who could drive the vehicle in reverse when retreating under fire. This meant the vehicle never needed to stop, never lost momentum during tactical withdrawals. One driver faced forward, the other backward. Speed was maintained regardless of direction. Let's talk about that speed. On paved roads, the Puma could reach 85 to 90 km per hour. This doesn't sound extraordinary by modern standards, but in 1943 it was exceptional for an armoured vehicle. More importantly, the Puma maintained high speeds off-road. Where tracked vehicles bogged down in mud or snow, the 8 driven wheels clawed for traction and kept moving. Where wheeled trucks broke axles on rough terrain, the sophisticated suspension absorbed the punishment. The operational range was 600 kilometers on roads, less cross-country, but still impressive. This combination of speed, range, and firepower created something unprecedented. The Puma could appear where the enemy didn't expect it, engage targets effectively, and disappear before concentrated fire could be brought to bear. It was a ghost, a phantom that haunted supply lines and exposed flanks. The first Pumas reached combat units in late 1943, just as Germany's strategic situation was deteriorating. The tide had turned, Kursk had failed. The Soviets were advancing. In the west, Italy had been invaded. The Wehrmacht was being pushed back on all fronts. This was not the war of 1940. This was a war of retreat, of desperate defence, of trying to delay the inevitable, and in this new context, the Puma's capabilities proved perfectly suited. Eastern Front, Ukraine, autumn 1943. A Puma from Aufklärungsabteilung 24, the 24th Reconnaissance Battalion, prowls the approaches to a German defensive position. Soviet armoured spearheads are probing for weaknesses. The Puma crew spots a column of T-34 tanks 2 kilometers distant, moving along a tree line. They don't engage, that's not their role. Instead, they radio the position to artillery and panzer reserves. Minutes later, German guns open fire. The Soviet tanks scatter. The Puma has done its job without firing a shot, but the Soviets aren't blind. Reconnaissance units identify the likely position of German observers. Mortars start dropping. The Puma's crew has perhaps 30 seconds. The driver doesn't wait for orders. The vehicle is already moving, 8 wheels churning dirt, engine screaming. Mortar rounds impact where they were sitting moments before. The Puma races 2 kilometers down a forest trail, stops, deploys again. The enemy has to start searching from scratch. This is the reality of armoured reconnaissance. It's not about heroic charges or dramatic tank duels. It's about information. See the enemy. Report the enemy. Don't die. The Puma excelled at all 3. Western Front, France, summer 1944. Allied forces have broken out from Normandy. German units are in chaotic retreat. A Puma from Panzer Lehr Division's reconnaissance battalion finds itself cut off from the main body of the division. American Sherman tanks control the roads. Escape seems impossible. But the Puma's crew has studied their maps. They know every farm track, every forest path. Under cover of darkness, they navigate 30 kilometers through American-held territory, moving at speeds that would be reckless in daylight. The 8-wheel drive and all-wheel steering allow them to negotiate narrow trails and sharp turns. By dawn, they've rejoined German lines, bringing crucial intelligence about American positions. A Tiger tank attempting the same journey would have been heard from kilometers away, would have gotten stuck, would have been destroyed. Here's where the Puma's design philosophy proves its worth. A Tiger I weighed 56 tons. It was slow, mechanically unreliable, consumed fuel voraciously, and required constant maintenance. Each Tiger was extraordinarily expensive and required specialized parts. When a Tiger was lost, it represented a massive investment destroyed. Germany produced fewer than 1,400 Tigers during the entire war. The Puma weighed just 11.5 tons. It was mechanically reliable by German standards. It was far cheaper to produce than any tank. About 100 Pumas were manufactured, limited not by the vehicle's design but by Germany's collapsing industrial capacity in 1944 and 1945. But consider the strategic efficiency. One Tiger might kill dozens of enemy tanks before being destroyed, captured or abandoned due to mechanical failure. One Puma might never kill a single enemy tank, yet provide intelligence that allows German forces to avoid encirclement, escape traps, or position themselves advantageously. Which has more value? In a war Germany was losing, in a context where preserving combat power mattered more than inflicting losses, the Puma's survivability made it strategically superior to vehicles with more impressive combat records. The combat reports from Puma crews emphasize this again and again. Mobility equals survival. A Puma that spots enemy armor and withdraws successfully has accomplished its mission. Engaging was optional, surviving was mandatory. There's a specific incident from the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, that illustrates this perfectly. December 1944. A Puma from the 2nd Panzer Division's reconnaissance battalion is scouting ahead of the division's main advance. They encounter a roadblock defended by American infantry with a 57mm anti-tank gun. A German tank would probably engage, trying to suppress the gun and break through. The Puma crew makes a different choice. They reverse at high speed, disappearing around a bend before the Americans can fire. They radio the position to division headquarters. Artillery strikes obliterate the roadblock. The Puma returns 30 minutes later, rolls through the wreckage, continues the advance. No German casualties. Mission accomplished. This is the Puma's doctrine. Don't fight fair. Don't fight at all if you can avoid it. Use speed and intelligence to make the enemy's firepower irrelevant. The technical specifications tell part of the story, but they don't capture the psychological element. Tank crews, even in heavy tanks, knew they were targets. Every encounter could be their last. Puma crews operated under different mathematics. Their armor wouldn't save them from a direct hit, so they didn't rely on it. They relied on not being where the enemy expected, not being where the guns were aimed, not being there when the shells arrived. This created a different mindset. Aggression tempered by pragmatism, boldness balanced by calculation. German tactical doctrine for reconnaissance units emphasized this. The Aufklärung, reconnaissance battalions, were the tip of the spear, but they weren't meant to break on enemy defenses. They probed, reported, withdrew. They found the enemy's flanks, his gaps, his weak points. They screened friendly movements, preventing enemy reconnaissance from doing the same. They were force multipliers, making every panzer division more effective by providing the information needed for intelligent decision-making. The Puma's design supported this doctrine perfectly. The long operational range meant reconnaissance patrols could push deep into enemy territory. The speed meant they could cover vast areas quickly, building a comprehensive picture of enemy dispositions. The firepower meant they could defend themselves when discovered and destroy enemy reconnaissance vehicles before they could report back. The armor meant they could survive mistakes, at least sometimes. One feature that often gets overlooked is the radio equipment. The Puma carried a FU-G12 radio, with a range of up to 40 kilometers on the move. This was critical. Raw intelligence has no value if it can't be transmitted. The Puma could spot an enemy formation and immediately report it to division headquarters, allowing for rapid responses. This made the vehicle's information gathering far more valuable than if crews had to physically return to friendly lines before sharing what they'd learned. The operational tempo of Puma units was intense. These weren't vehicles that sat in defensive positions waiting for the enemy. They were constantly moving, constantly searching. Crews could spend days in the field, navigating by map and compass, sleeping in the vehicle, eating rations on the move. The diesel engine's reliability was crucial here. Unlike gasoline engines of the era, which required constant maintenance and were prone to failure, the Tatra diesel could run for days with minimal attention. There's a certain irony in the Puma story. Germany developed this exceptional reconnaissance vehicle just as reconnaissance was becoming almost impossible. Allied air superiority meant that moving during daylight invited destruction from fighter bombers. Allied signals intelligence meant radio transmissions could be located and targeted. Allied numerical superiority meant that even the best reconnaissance often simply confirmed what German commanders already knew. They were outnumbered and being outmaneuvered. The Puma arrived too late to change Germany's fate. Yet even in defeat, the vehicle proved its worth. During the long retreats through France, Russia, Poland, and finally into Germany itself, Pumas provided the intelligence that allowed German units to escape encirclement, avoid ambushes, and delay the Allied advance. They were part of why the war didn't end in late 1944, why Germany fought on into 1945, not because they could turn the tide, but because they helped Germany's battered armies survive to fight another day. Eastern Front, January 1945. Soviet forces are driving into East Prussia. German defences are collapsing. Civilians are fleeing westward in massive columns. A Puma crew from a reconnaissance unit has been cut off from their parent formation. They could abandon their vehicle and try to escape on foot. Instead, they use the Puma's capabilities to navigate through Soviet lines, guiding refugee columns to routes the Soviets haven't blocked yet. The vehicle's speed allows it to race ahead, scout the route, race back, update the refugees, repeat. Over 3 days, they help thousands of civilians reach German-held territory. Eventually, Soviet tanks catch up to them near Königsberg. The Puma engages, destroys an opposing armoured car, then flees at maximum speed. The 8-wheel drive claws through snow that would have trapped anything else. They make it. That crew survived the war, their Puma didn't. They abandoned it when they ran out of fuel in April 1945, demolishing it to prevent capture. But they lived because their vehicle gave them options other vehicles didn't have. Post-war analysis by Allied intelligence confirmed what German crews had known all along. The Puma was the best armoured reconnaissance vehicle of World War II. American, British, and Soviet armoured cars were inferior in almost every metric. The American M8 Greyhound was faster on roads but had weaker armour, less firepower, and inferior cross-country performance. British armoured cars like the Daimler had reasonable firepower but lacked the speed and range. Soviet armoured cars were generally lightly armed and poorly protected. The Puma set a standard that wouldn't be matched until the 1960s and 1970s, with vehicles like the French AMX-10RC and German Luchs. What made the Puma work wasn't any single feature. It was the integration, speed and firepower, armour and mobility, range and reliability. Each element supported the others, creating a vehicle where the whole exceeded the sum of its parts. This is systems thinking applied to armoured vehicle design, and it was ahead of its time. Consider the alternative Germany pursued simultaneously: heavy tanks. The Tiger I was followed by the Tiger II, even heavier at 70 tons. The Panther medium tank weighed 45 tons. Germany poured resources into these behemoths, and they achieved impressive kill ratios. But they were maintenance nightmares. They broke down constantly. They consumed fuel Germany didn't have. They were too heavy for many bridges. They got stuck in mud. And when they were destroyed or abandoned, the loss was catastrophic because each one represented such a massive investment. The Puma philosophy was different. Build something that can survive. Build something reliable. Build something that does its job and gets home. This is the rational approach to armoured warfare when you're losing, when resources are scarce, when you need to preserve what combat power you have. Germany didn't learn this lesson. They kept building Tigers and Panthers until the factories stopped running. They kept sacrificing mechanical reliability for thicker armour and bigger guns. They kept designing vehicles for the war they wanted to fight instead of the war they were actually fighting. The Puma represented the smarter path, and it was largely ignored in favour of increasingly desperate attempts to build an unstoppable tank. Here's the hard truth about armoured warfare that the Puma embodies. Survivability isn't about how much armour you have, it's about not getting hit in the first place. It's about seeing the enemy before he sees you. It's about being somewhere else when the shells arrive. A Tiger could survive hits that would destroy any other tank, but it was slow enough that it couldn't avoid those hits. A Puma couldn't survive hits, so it avoided them. Which approach is smarter? Modern military doctrine has embraced this. Reconnaissance vehicles today prioritize mobility and sensors over armour. They use thermal imaging, radar, and communication systems to detect enemies at extreme ranges, then use speed to stay out of contact. They're not trying to win firefights, they're trying to provide information while surviving. The Puma pioneered this approach in 1943. There's a philosophical element here worth exploring. Heavy tanks represent a certain mindset about warfare. Stand and fight. Dominate through superior firepower and protection. Impose your will on the enemy. This is the armour-centric view that dominated tank development from World War I through the Cold War. The Puma represents a different philosophy. Maneuver over mass, intelligence over firepower, survival over victory. This is a more sophisticated understanding of military effectiveness, one that recognises that the side that preserves its forces longest often wins, regardless of individual engagement outcomes. Nazi Germany's heavy tank obsession was partly psychological. They needed to believe they could still win through superior technology, that quality could overcome quantity. The Tiger and Panther programs were as much about propaganda and morale as military effectiveness. The Puma, by contrast, was honest. It didn't pretend to be invincible. It acknowledged reality and worked within it. The production numbers tell the story. Germany built about 6,000 Panthers and 1,400 Tigers at enormous cost. They built roughly 100 Pumas. Imagine if those resources had been redirected. Imagine 1,000 Pumas providing reconnaissance for German divisions. Imagine the intelligence picture that would have provided. Imagine how much more effectively German forces could have been employed with that information. Would it have changed the war's outcome? No, but it might have made Germany's defence more effective, might have delayed the end, might have saved equipment and lives that were instead wasted on broken-down Tigers abandoned by the roadside. The Puma's legacy extends beyond its immediate military impact. It influenced post-war armoured car design across the world. The 8-wheel configuration became standard for heavy armoured cars. The emphasis on speed and firepower over heavy armour became doctrine for reconnaissance vehicles. The technical solutions, from the all-wheel drive to the dual-direction capability, were studied and copied. The Puma proved that wheeled armoured vehicles could be tactically effective even against tracked opponents if designed intelligently. In the final analysis, the Sd.Kfz 234/2 Puma represents what German armour development should have been: practical, reliable, effective. It solved a real problem with an elegant solution. It didn't chase fantasies of invincibility. It gave crews the tools to do their jobs and survive. It embodied a smarter way of thinking about armoured warfare. While Tiger tanks corroded in museums as monuments to excess, the Puma's influence lives on in every modern reconnaissance vehicle that prioritises mobility and sensors over armour. It was the right vehicle for the wrong time, developed by a regime that couldn't recognise its own best ideas. The Puma survived when Tigers died because it was designed to survive. It succeeded when Panthers failed because it was designed to succeed at a specific mission rather than trying to do everything. It represents a path not taken, a glimpse of what rational armoured vehicle development looks like when divorced from propaganda and wishful thinking. In that sense, it's not just one of World War II's most effective armoured vehicles. It's a lesson in how to think about military technology, how to match capabilities to missions, how to design for reality rather than fantasy. The Wehrmacht ignored that lesson. Modern militaries have embraced it, and that's why the Puma matters, decades after the last one rolled off the production line. Speed, intelligence, survival. Sometimes the best way to win is to live to fight another day. The Puma understood that. It's a smarter way to wage war.